I think it looks like we have mostly everyone here. A very good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are, which area of the world you are currently. Yeah, I'd like to say hello to our presidents of AsiaTEFL, Prof. Ravinder Gargesh and Professor Kilryong Lee, who are also with us today. Welcome, thank you for joining us. First of all, just to encourage everybody with this participation, we'd like to encourage that you turn on your camera so that we can feel some bits of face-to-face interactions, some smiles, maybe some eye contact, and etc. Maybe you see some familiar faces that you've not seen for a while. So please do turn on your cameras if you're willing. Yeah. Good day to you all once again. It's a real great pleasure for me to be here and have the opportunity to welcome you for the fourth webinar. My name is Fiona Sadagopan. I'm your MC for today, right? I'm a senior lecturer from Asia Pacific University in Malaysia, and also one of the committee members for the AsiaTEFL Webinar Series 2021. So we welcome you. I'm also thrilled to let you know that there are more than 1,500 people from 50 countries around the world who actually registered their interest in attending this webinar. It's really remarkable to know that we've got a global presence, and we're certainly proud of the fact that we're part of this diverse and vibrant ELT community. And we welcome you irrespective of who you are, where you're from, and etc. Right? So let's move on with talking about the topic for today. Today, the topic is transcending the frontier of English language education, assessment and evaluation in the new normal. And we have three guest speakers who are experts in their own fields and passionate about sharing their expertise and experience with designing assessments and evaluations in dynamic ways to capture students as well as teacher perspectives of assessment and evaluation in the new normal. So before we proceed, I would like to start with a short video clip on the AsiaTEFL Professional Network Webinar Series 2021. Let's watch it together.
Of AsiaTEFL has only been through its annual conferences and through its publications in the Journal of AsiaTEFL and through the AsiaTEFL book series. This webinar series will provide greater visibility all the year round to AsiaTEFL.
AsiaTEFL Webinar Series is a realization of aspiration to meeting together for academic development and promoting friendship despite this pandemic. Professor Kanakumaran Subramaniam has initiated this project, and he has put lots of efforts on this. His devotion should be appreciated. I hope that everyone participating in webinar series will get engaged and further stimulated in each webinar.
Thank you very much to the technical team for playing this inspiring clip. And yes, let's support our professional community together. Next, I would like to invite Professor Pragasit Sititikul, the AsiaTEFL Vice President for Conference and Professional Network, who will be delivering the welcome speech and sharing with us a little bit about the AsiaTEFL conference. Please welcome our Vice President, Professor Pragasit Sititikul.
Thank you very much, Fiona, for the nice introduction. Greetings from Bangkok, Thailand, everyone. They are the founder of AsiaTEFL, the presidents of AsiaTEFL, AsiaTEFL committee members, guest speakers, participants, and ladies and gentlemen. I'm so excited to have you all here to participate in our fourth webinar today. It is my great pleasure to welcome everyone to this webinar, and thank you for joining this event hosted by AsiaTEFL organization. I'm very happy to inform you that over 1,200 people registered for this webinar. And the main purposes of the webinar series are to provide AsiaTEFL members and English language education advocates and practitioners with an opportunity to engage in issues and developments in English language education in Asia and in other parts of the world. In addition, the webinar series project serves as a platform to share current and new developments in English language education with members in the interest of mutual development, technology, and knowledge transfer. Today, we are very delighted to have three special and well-recognized guest speakers from different parts of the world, from Asia, Europe, and America, to share their talks with us under the theme, Transcending the Frontier of English Language Education, Assessment and Evaluation in a New Normal. This will be a wonderful opportunity for us to hear and learn from their insightful talks. And I'm very confident that their talks will be very beneficial and broaden our knowledge. Ladies and gentlemen, let me inform you that besides the webinar series projects, AsiaTEFL organization also organizes its annual international conference. And the 2021 conference will be the 19th AsiaTEFL International Conference to be taking place in India during the 3rd and 5th of December in just less than 3 months from now. The conference theme is Empowering through the English language, the dynamics of teaching and learning of English in Asia. If you have not registered for it, please do not hesitate to do so. For more information, please visit AsiaTEFL website, okay, worldwideweb.asiatefl.org. Finally, we hope that you will enjoy our webinar. And we would like to thank you for your participation. And we also hope that you will continue to support AsiaTEFL in every way possible. Thank you so much and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you so much, Vice President Professor Pragasit Sititikul, for your warm welcome and details of the AsiaTEFL conference to be held in December. I'd like to just make a few announcements before I introduce the moderator, if that's okay with everybody. Once again, a gentle reminder to those who have not registered for this webinar, please do so. This could be part of our database for purposes that we need in terms of arrangements of future webinars. So we'd really appreciate if you could sign in using the link and the QR code here to register for this particular webinar. Thanks. Yeah. Please also be informed that this particular Zoom platform has a maximum of 500 participants. So if by happens you accidentally log out, there's a network issue or something else that happens, please bear with us. If it turns out we do have more than 500 participants, we may not be able to readmit you into this particular Zoom meeting. All right. So what you can do is actually follow us on the session on Facebook. Facebook is live. The link is there. I think the QR code is there, right? So please do follow us live as well. And if you have friends who can't connect with the Zoom, they can also follow us on live on Facebook, AsiaTEFL Facebook, right? If you do have any questions during our actual speeches, we would prefer if you can send them to Mentimeter. So if you can see on the right-hand side, you have the Mentimeter scan code there if you want to post some questions. The other way you can actually pose questions is to type it out in the chat room. And then what we will do is we will select the questions and pass it on to the moderator to then question the speakers later during the Q&A time. All right. Please also note very, very interesting phenomenon, so to speak, because we've only just started this. We've started issuing e-certificates, and we're delighted to tell you for today's webinar, everybody attending can receive an e-certificate, but you will need to complete an e-form. So we'll probably display the slide at the end of the webinar where you can fill out the form and etc. We'll give you a few more guidelines on this later. All right. So don't worry too much about it. Let's just go on and enjoy the webinar first, and then we'll give you guidelines on how to fill up the e-form and etc. for your e-certificate at the end of the webinar. All right. For now, though, let's get on to the session, and I will introduce you to the moderator for today, Mr. Kittipat Sutichaiwira, right? Mr. Kittipat Sutichaiwira received his master's degree in English language teaching ELT from the Language Institute, Thammasat University, Thailand. He's pursuing his PhD as a grantee in ELT at Thammasat University currently, and he's also working as a part-time lecturer at Silpakorn University, Thailand. Please welcome Mr. Kittipat Sutichaiwira, the moderator for webinar 4. Welcome.
Thank you, Fiona, for your nice introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us wherever you are in the world right now. I'm Kittipat, and it is such a great pleasure for me to be the moderator today. And I'm very glad to see many of your familiar faces, new participants on Zoom, and viewers on Facebook Live right now. Ladies and gentlemen, our theme today is transcending the frontier of English language education, assessment, and evaluation in the new normal. When we think about the directions of language assessment and evaluation in the new normal, you know, in the new normal, it's kind of a big question, isn't it? So, well, I think it's a great opportunity for us to share, to exchange, and talk about it in this webinar in the form of panel discussion. And yeah, it is very honored that we have 3 distinguished speakers joining us from different countries, and they will be sharing their expertise, experiences, suggestions, or thoughts about language assessment and evaluation to tide over COVID-19 in this entire year. But before we get started, let me inform you of the webinar, the format of the webinar. Our webinar today will be divided into 2 rounds. In the first round, each panelist has about 15 minutes to share their presentations. After our 3 panelists have completed their presentations, there will be a Q&A session. And then we will resume with the second round. In this second round, each panelist will have about 2 or 3 minutes to share their thoughts in summing up today's theme. All right, so without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker, Professor Barry O'Sullivan. Professor Barry O'Sullivan is the head of assessment research and development at the British Council, where he was responsible for the design and development of the ACTIS test service. He has undertaken research across many areas of language testing and assessment and its history. And he has worked on the development and refinement of the socio-cognitive model of test development and validation since 2000. He's particularly interested in communication of test validation and test localization. He has presented his work at many conferences around the world, while almost 100 of his publications have appeared in a range of international journals, books, and technical reports. He has worked on many test development and validation projects over the past 25 years and advises ministries and institutions on assessment policy and practice. He is the founding president of the UK Association of Language Testing and Assessment and holds honorary and visiting chairs at a number of universities globally. So Professor Barry will be speaking to us on the topic of language assessment practice in the new normal. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Professor Barry O'Sullivan.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Currently, I'm in Ireland, where I now live. It's early morning on Saturday, but not too early. It's fairly reasonable.
The mic.
Professor Barry, please unmute your microphone.
Yes, I have. It's been coming off and on, I think.
All right.
You should hear me now, I hope.
Right.
So without further ado, let's get into the talk. I should share my screen. Can you all see that?
Yes, we can see your slide now.
Well, the first thing I should say is whenever I think of this concept of the new normal, it always brings me back to an event that happened to myself many years ago, probably before quite a few of you were born. I was at school back in the 1960s in a Christian Brothers school in Ireland. And so I thought I would start this concept of the new normal by reflecting for a minute on my experience there. And so I thought I'd write a movie script, a very short one. So the scene, the backstory of the boys' secondary school run by a religious order in rural Ireland in the 1960s. The scene, the teacher chastises one of the boys for a mistake made in class. And in those days, anything that you did apart from breathing was a mistake in class, it seemed to me. So this is the scene, this is what happened. Oh, this is not happening. So the teacher shouting, "O'Sullivan, you're not normal." Boy, sarcastically, "What's normal, brother?" Brother, physically with open hand, bang. End scene. The point, what's normal, brother? There isn't any normal anymore, I think. We've moved on from what we thought was a normal, a steady way of doing things in language assessment. And we've moved on to a new period in our existence, if you like, where what we're doing is completely new. Our different ways of thinking, our different ways of putting tests together, our different ways of evaluating the tests. Everything has moved on. It's been moving for probably 10 to 12 years, but over the last couple of years, the movement has changed radically, and it's pushed on at a speed that is in some ways good, in some ways maybe not so good. So some of the big things that have changed in the practice of assessment, well, the traditional delivery of assessment was pencil and paper, but let's face it, over the last decade or more, 15 years, digital has been more and more a part of what we do. So we've tended to be center-based, 4 skills, and working to a set of standards, usually a language standard. In Europe, we're stuck very much with the CEFR, which has helped us dramatically over the years. In terms of the scoring system we've used human, and we've used hybrid systems. The humans tended to use rating scales with 4 skills. The hybrids tended to look at, again, 4 skills, but looking at a black box where we weren't always sure what the system was doing. What's changed in the new normal? Well, over the last 2 years, pencil and paper testing has really quietened down quite a lot. It hasn't been possible in many countries for long periods of time to test people face-to-face, pencil and paper. So we've moved away to digital. So we've not had so much center-based. 4 skills testing, my opinion, a lot of tests out there that are claiming to be testing 4 skills are not testing 4 skills. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a while. We're still talking about standards. People are still claiming their tests are linked to particular standards. In terms of scoring, we still have human, we still have hybrid. The black box is beginning to change. People are beginning to understand that a black box scoring system, AI-driven scoring system, isn't really telling us enough about what is happening in that system. So we need to learn a little bit more about it. And again, we'll come back and talk about that a bit later as well, because that is a critical part of what we're doing. We can't simply expect these systems to fit into our assessments and work in a perfect way, because we know they don't. The other big thing that, of course, that has changed was even where we've had digital delivery of tests, and this is an IELTS center, we now have, from the TOEFL side, a picture of a very happy young chap with his cup of coffee about to take his test, or in the middle of taking his TOEFL test. The idea being that we've now moved to this at-home concept. So we have remote invigilation. And often these systems are AI-driven or AI-supported. To what extent do they work? To what extent are there inbuilt biases in those systems? We need to think about that, and we will. In terms of the scoring, we've moved on from either very simple machines to human scoring of handwritten responses to AI-driven systems, either human in the loop, hybrid systems, or in some cases, purely machine scoring systems. So everything has changed. And over the last few years, it's exacerbated. Our situation has exacerbated the change. Even invigilation. You know, this is taken from a website of a company that delivers AI supported systems, where if anything happens, if you disappear from screen, your test is automatically stopped. If you look in the wrong direction, your test is stopped. If you make movements that are not expected, your test is stopped, all kinds of stuff. So we have these systems that are running our tests now. Though interestingly enough, not many, while a lot of universities around the world are accepting these invigilation systems, not many governments are yet, because they see that there are flaws in those systems. And we'll come back and talk a little tiny bit about that later on, because we don't have a huge amount of time today. So are things getting better? Well, in some ways, yes, they are. They're cheaper, they're convenient, they're instant results, they're faster tests. You know, we're moving from a 3-hour test for TOEFL, the original IB TOEFL. We're now looking at tests that are only taking an hour and a half, which is really an interesting shrinking, because can a test that's an hour give you the same amount of information about a person as a 3-hour test? I don't think so, but you know, we have to come to some sort of balance, don't we? So in some ways, yeah, things are getting better. However, there is a massive however. And however, I've boiled it down into 3 questions. And that's related to what's being tested, what's being scored, and bias. The big issue that we have right now is bias, that we don't really get our head around terribly well. If we think about what is being tested, traditionally in the UK approach to language testing and European approach, we focused on the content of the test. What exactly is the test testing? What exactly is the test telling us about the person who's taking the test? In addition, what's being scored? What aspect of that performance is adding to that? And finally, is there any bias? So through rater training, we try to build it out. In automated systems, without a counterbalance, all of these things are just tilting the system to an extent that eventually they'll fail. They fail in that they don't tell us, they don't give us information about the candidate that is reliable, that is consistent, and that, well, it may be consistent actually, but it may be consistently wrong, or consistently inadequate. And we have to understand, and we have to accept that. But of course, it doesn't mean that everything is unsalvageable. So if we think about it, what's being tested? If we have a clear language model that's driving the test, so if we're very clear about this is the aspect of language we're testing, this is what it means, this is how we're testing it, and this is how it's going to be scored, so that there's a systematic model behind the development of the test. And it's a transparent model, so that we understand very clearly what the test is doing, what the test is telling us about the person. Then we have some right, I believe, to accept the scores that are generated in the test. Finally, the area of bias. If we have evidence that the developers have pre-checked the test for bias, then we can be, at least in some way, hopeful that the system will work in a meaningful way. Now, bias can be found in all areas. You know, human raters are often trained to identify bias within their own scoring. That's part of the standardization and the training system. What we try to do in an AI system is identify, first of all, the potential sources for bias. So, you know, is it possible, for example, that a person's skin color could bias the system? We know that in AI facial recognition systems, there is a bias, and a significant bias, which is both gender and skin color. So if you happen to be a darker skinned woman, you're in trouble because it doesn't really recognize you very well. And there's some very good research done by Timnit Gebru on this in the United States. She actually got herself fired for it from Google. I shouldn't laugh because it shouldn't have happened. She's a fantastic researcher. And she's come up with some brilliant ideas that we're using in the British Council right now to try to identify strengths and weaknesses in AI systems that we use. But she was able to find that if you're a male, the system works like 97% of the time. And if you're a black female, it can be down to 50% or lower. So in other words, the systems have not been trained on appropriate data. So one of the things that we're all looking at now is how can we demonstrate that our AI scoring systems and our AI invigilation systems are based around training data that reflect the candidature for the test that we're testing. A very simple concept, but one that has not really entered into the world of language testing at all. In fact, yesterday I spoke at a British Association for Applied Linguistics conference about this subject. And it was the first time anybody has ever spoken about bias in auto-scoring systems at a language testing conference. That, to me, is shocking. So we need to confront these things. We need to identify where our weaknesses are, and we need to balance those weaknesses. We need to ensure that our test is a balanced and fair test. Otherwise, it's not giving us information that we can rely on. It's not a fair test. It's not a just test. It's a biased test. Now, if you want to hear more about it, of course, I'll talk about these things forever. This is the current model of language test development and validation that we use. It's quite complicated. I'm not going to go into it. We don't have time. But what we can identify very quickly is what language is being tested and why. The AI scoring systems that we use. How is the scoring system developed? What are the specifications? What do we know about it? And how is it validated for use in this test, in this context? And that's the critical bit. I don't care if this system was validated on 1 million people. Are the 1 million people representative of the population taking my test? Because if they're not, take your test away, I'm not interested. It doesn't necessarily work. It'll still give me scores. Don't get me wrong. It will give me scores, but do the scores mean anything? I'm afraid I'm not so sure. If you want to hear more about all of this AI stuff, I'm going to be talking again in November at the Asian Association for Language Assessment on this very topic of validating these systems. So tune in if you're around and if you're interested in hearing some more about it. I'll be talking about a project that we've undertaken at the British Council with 2 colleagues, as you can see, Trevor Breakspear and William Bayliss. Okay, thank you for the opportunity for speaking this morning. I'm looking forward to the rest of the morning. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Professor Barry, for your wonderful presentation. You have provided us a general overview of what has changed and if things have changed for the better. And you've mentioned what we should consider, like clear language model, criteria, or even pre-checked for bias. We should balance it, right? Because we need a fair test or assessment, right? So yeah, ladies and gentlemen, this is just to remind you once again, if you have any questions, please send us your questions on ManyReader or in the chat room, and we will have the Q&A session after the first round. Now let's move on to our second speaker, Professor Hyun-Jong Kim. She is a professor in the Graduate School of TESOL at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies in Seoul, Korea. She earned a Doctor of Education in Applied Linguistics from Teachers College, Columbia University, with a dissertation on rating behaviors on second language speaking assessment. Her research has focused on second and foreign language performance assessment, learning-oriented assessment, and language test validation. She is currently the director of the Foreign Language Examination Center at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Professor Hyun-Jong Kim will be giving us a talk on the topic of online classroom-based assessment in the Korea context. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome her, Professor Hyun-Jong Kim.
Okay, thank you for introducing me, Kitipat. I also thank the AsiaTEFL Webinar organizers for inviting me. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Hyun-Jong Kim, and I'll share the PPT slides first and start my talk. Okay. Today, I'm going to talk about English language assessment in the new normal, focusing on classroom-based assessment. Okay. In the first part of the presentation, I'll briefly present the characteristics of classroom-based assessment and its learning-oriented nature. Then in the second part, I'll introduce a Korean government research project that aimed to implement online computer-based learning-oriented language assessment in the secondary classroom context. And finally, suggestions for future online language assessment will be discussed. I hope this presentation will give you an idea of what learning-oriented language assessment is and how it can be implemented in the online teaching and learning context. Let's first look at the characteristics of second language classroom assessment briefly. Traditionally, people have viewed second language assessment as a tool to evaluate student achievement in a large-scale testing context. This traditional large-scale testing is external to the classroom, and it has been characterized as judgment-focused, learner excluded, and authoritative assessment. It also lacks support and feedback during and after assessment. So it is often referred to as an assessment of learning. And based on extensive large-scale testing practices, people used to believe that classroom assessment, which is internal to the classroom, did not differ from traditional large-scale tests. However, second language assessment researchers have started to recognize the difference between assessments internal and external to the classroom. They started to talk about the unique characteristics of classroom assessment. For example, oftentimes the entire process is managed by the teacher in classroom assessment throughout the test design, item development, administration, scoring, and analysis and interpretation process. With the growing awareness that assessment is internal to the classroom, learning-oriented language assessment has recently started to receive attention. Learning-oriented language assessment is not necessarily for classroom assessment, but it is regarded as important in the classroom teaching and learning context because assessment can serve as a bridge that connects classroom teaching to students' further learning. Contrary to traditional large-scale testing, learning-oriented language assessment is characterized as learning-focused and learner-involved assessment, such as peer assessment and self-assessment. And it also provides scaffolding during the assessment and immediate learning-focused feedback. That is, learning is embedded into assessment, and because of this, it is referred to as assessment for learning or assessment as learning. Learning-oriented language assessment has been used and researched in many teaching and learning situations. And today, I will share an example with you and talk about how a learning-oriented classroom assessment can be implemented in the online context. In Korea, English language teaching and learning in the public schools are based on the national curriculum. And the current national curriculum, which was first implemented in 2015, emphasizes learning-oriented language assessment with these features you see in the screen. And to help teachers implement such an assessment in the classroom setting, a long-term research project was carried out by the Korea Institute for Curriculum and Evaluation. The project, which was named the KAIS E-Assessment, aimed to develop an online computer-based assessment system for 5 school subjects, and this system intended to assess the 6 core competencies stated in the national curriculum as part of the school's education goals. The English language part of the project aimed to evaluate 2 core competencies out of 6 in the classroom context, and they are students' communication skills and civic competency. In the first year, 2019, a computer-based assessment was designed and developed, considering the core competencies of the national curriculum, the nature of the English language subject, and the teaching and learning goals. And during the second year, 2020, additional assessments were designed and developed. And these assessments were pilot tested as well. And now in 2021, the assessments are being tested in actual classroom settings to improve the assessment system throughout the assessment process, and also to determine its suitability for actual use online in the future. Today, I'm presenting an example of English assessment developed as part of the KAIS E-Assessment. And I'll first introduce the assessment briefly and then discuss how it is learning-oriented. This example assessment was designed to evaluate the extent of middle school students' learning while students are engaged in communicative tasks for introducing Korean culture to foreign friends. And as you can see in this table, students engaged in the tasks across the 3 class sessions. The assessment construct largely included communication skills and civic competency. And here, communication skills were operationalized as communicative language ability used for English listening, reading, speaking, and writing in a given context. And civic competency was defined as understanding diverse languages and cultures, cooperation, and cultural identity. And for the students' performance, various types of items and technologies were included in the assessment, such as the use of a text editor and template for the extended production writing, and online chatting and bulletin board for the cooperative group writing, an online survey, or the peer assessment. And this example assessment showed learning-oriented features in many places. Also, the learning-oriented features were successfully delivered online. To explain these features of the assessment, I'll use Hemp-Lyons and Green's framework, which includes 3 key elements of learning-oriented language assessment: the authentic learning task, student involvement, and feedback as feed-forward. In relation to the first feature, the assessment tasks used in the example assessment were authentic and learning-focused. The given context of the assessment task was authentic because the students could have a chance to introduce their culture to foreigners in writing or speaking in real life, especially in the online context. And another example can be found in the individual tasks. For example, here, students were asked to find a place on the map after listening to a recorded description. Drag the turtle tower picture and drop it in the right place. And this is very similar to a real-life task that students could face while traveling. The second feature of learning-oriented language assessment, which is student involvement, was integrated into a speaking task. To introduce Korean culture, 4 students worked in groups. Students determined their roles in each group for the script writing and video recording or the oral presentation. And each individual student recorded a part and then put the 4 parts together for submission. And before submitting the presentation recording, students had a chance to self-assess and peer assess one another's speaking performance. That is, the students were involved in the assessment and had an opportunity to evaluate their own performance using the same criteria the teacher used. Such self and peer assessments were used to evaluate communication skills as well as civic competency. The last feature, feedback as feed-forward, was provided not only by the teacher, but also by other students and the computer system during the assessment. For example, as seen in the previous speaking task, students had a chance to self and peer assess their performance. This allowed the students to fix any problems before their submission. And also, while students were writing the script, they had a chance to give and receive feedback on one another's writing in the group chat room. This was done to improve their writing before the final submission. Also, for the selected response tasks, immediate feedback and hints for the second attempt were provided. In other words, students were scaffolded and supported in multiple ways during the assessment. So far, I introduced a research project that integrated learning-oriented features into an online, computer-based language assessment targeting secondary school students. Now, I'd like to make a few suggestions based on this assessment practice. Okay. To promote learning-oriented language assessment online, first, online assessment models should be provided to schools and classroom teachers. Teachers use different types of assessments at school, such as placement, achievement, and diagnostic tests. If online assessment models such as the KAIS e-assessment are developed for different assessment purposes, teachers will be able to broaden their perspectives in online language assessment, and they can adapt models to address their assessment needs. In relation to the first suggestion, continuous attempts should be made to develop learning-oriented assessment tasks and advanced computer-based systems to deliver assessments online. This cannot rely solely on individual teachers or schools. This can be possible when collaboration among stakeholders is enhanced. And lastly, to assess students' language performance online, continuous efforts should be made to help different stakeholder groups understand what learning-oriented language assessment is and how it can be delivered online. Active communication, especially with teachers and students, and I think also parents in Korea, active communication with them about both learning-oriented language assessment and online assessment systems could reduce any doubts concerning the validity and reliability of online assessment. And here are the sources that are referred to for the presentation. Thank you for listening.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor Kim, for addressing this interesting topic. I think we have learned a lot from you about online learning-oriented assessment, especially in your context as a bridge to connect teaching to learning. And we can see how it can be implemented in detail with good examples of English assessment and authentic tasks, and in the online system. And I believe that participants and viewers have got the concepts and ideas so that they can apply this into their own context during this pandemic time. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, we have come to our last speaker, but once again, please feel free to post your questions on Mentimeter or use our chat room here on Zoom to send your questions. The speakers will answer them in the Q&A session. So, all right, let me allow to introduce our last speaker, Mr. Sean Killeshart, and he is the co-founder and CEO of Edgesync, one of the world's leading online testing and remote proctoring companies with over 450,000 students and 50 institutional partners. Edgesync helps educational institutions to digitally remaster their own tests with a focus on high stakes language exams and with integrated remote proctoring technology. So Sean will be talking about the new standard of institutions to access English language proficiency with a focus on AI and natural language processing in education 5.0. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our speaker, Sean Killeshart.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. This is Sean. So first wanted to thank AsiaTEFL for hosting this session and for inviting me. Just a quick introduction before I share my slides. I am born and raised in New York City. My father's from India, and I've been living in South America for the last 8 years or so. So I have a interesting perspective on not only English language training, but generally how education has been developing online, especially around testing and assessment. And so today I'm going to share some of my personal experiences with you, tell you a bit about what we do at Edgesync, and also just kind of describe the way in which things are going, at least from where I'm sitting. So on that note, allow me to share my screen and we will jump right in. All right. So is everyone seeing my screen? Just
Yes.
Thumbs up. We're good? Okay, great. So again, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Edgesync. And what we do is we make online testing and remote proctoring, or as is now being termed as well, remote invigilation, easy for educational institutions. Before I tell you more about what we do, I wanted to tell you a quick story about Hannah. Hannah is the head of English programs, or was the head of English programs at Berlitz. I'm sure many of you know, being in the industry, Berlitz is one of the largest online or largest language companies on earth. They've been around for over 100 years, having started primarily in doing physical classes and now having moved online in a big way, especially in the last 5 to 10 years. Now, when we met Hannah, she was working at one of the offices in South America. Berlitz is a little bit fragmented in and around the world, but she had some pretty serious issues when it came to her testing procedures. So most of her testing had been done in pen and paper. When they had gone digital, a lot of it was done using multiple choice tests on a computer, which obviously, as we all know, is not anywhere near sufficient, especially when it comes to language testing. A lot of the long form testing for spoken and written evaluations were done via in-person interviews or Skype, which proved to be very burdensome, especially for her and her small team. When it came to doing high stakes testing for companies that Berlitz was working with, or even entrance testing for their students, it proved to be virtually impossible to get everyone tested in time and appropriately. On top of that, there were no reporting tools for her and her staff, and there was also no feedback for students. And one thing I didn't include on this slide was the security around testing, especially for the Berlitz students. Now, how did Edgesync address these problems? We are a tech company, and we provide three very specific services. We provide an authoring tool for institutions to create their own exams online. And as was mentioned, our primary focus is on language testing. We actually started our business doing preparation for individual students for TOEFL, IELTS, and TOEIC, and over the years have moved into a more tech-focused role and kind of been pushing this platform as opposed to a standardized solution. Now, aside from the authoring tool, we also offer remote proctoring for institutions or remote invigilation. This is really AI assisted using human beings and artificial intelligence. We are able to help institutions put out admissions tests online, midterms, finals, you name it, and we can create a test around it. And finally, detailed reporting for teachers and administrators, which has been a pretty significant pain point from my experience for institutions all over the world in terms of how they actually use their assessments effectively to improve their methodologies and general practices internally. When it comes to language testing, we have a focus on the 4 primary skills: reading, listening, speaking, and writing. We do actually test all 4 of them, and we do this using a network of 1,000 certified professors from around the world. And I'll explain a bit more about how we leverage technology to do this. But essentially, we have a massive team of professors who are able to individually evaluate spoken and written exercises from students around the planet. We do all of the reporting and feedback in 24 hours from the time the students actually conduct their test. And we do it all affordably and at scale. My background is specifically in the technology around this. So I'm going to touch on a lot of different themes during this presentation that basically explain how technology is now empowering teachers and administrators around the world to assess students at scale and do it affordably and effectively. Now, one of the ways that we handle the analysis of spoken and written English specifically, when we do, most of our testing is also done CEFR based. We have our own exam that we've created in partnership with Berlitz that is a 4-skill, 1-hour CEFR based test where all 4 skills are being tested and the spoken and written components are evaluated by this group of certified professors. Now, the way we do this is the students will actually submit a spoken exercise. They'll record their voice into their computer or their cell phone, write an essay on their phone or computer. One of the professors will then receive it and then analyze it according to 4 to 6 characteristics of spoken and written English. And so what you're seeing here is the 4 characteristics we use to analyze speaking, and additional strains and recommendations can be made by the professors for the students. And we've standardized this across all the partners that we have that use these kinds of exams, really trying to help them understand where their focus is. We have a few institutions or companies we work with that are more focused on accent and pronunciation. Others are looking for an evenly weighted system so that they can actually understand across these 4 components where their students lie. And we do a good job using the technology to be able to customize things for each company we work with. Just generally, where we stand as an institution, we are very much a startup, but we do have over 450,000 students, 50 partners around the world. There is an Edgesync user in every country on Earth, and over 14 million questions have been answered on the system to date. Some of the partners we work with, large-scale universities, as well as English training companies. Many of you may have heard of not only Berlitz, but also Open English and Cambly and EF as 2 large companies. We do different forms of testing for all these different companies in the sense that what we have created is really a platform that allows any institution to create and administer exams. Now, the focus of the conversation today, I wanted to talk about things are actually, evolving in the education space with technology. And just to set the context a bit, I'm sure many of you have heard of this term Industry 4.0, but for those of you who haven't, this is essentially where we stand right now in terms of the general macroeconomic picture of humanity. In the 1700s, we created the steam engine, which then turned into the production line in the 1900s, deemed Industry 2.0. Once computers were integrated into the mix, it allowed us to further automate and standardize things. And the interconnectivity of the internet is really what's now propelling things forward in a meaningful way. And this is what people mean when they talk about Industry 4.0. And in the context of education, it becomes particularly interesting. Now, over the centuries, education has changed quite a bit. Unfortunately, it has also remained relatively static in terms of how much is done. And this is really what we're trying to help institutions overcome. So as things have progressed, and our focus really being on Education 3 and 4.0, where computers not only became a tool for users to more easily access information and standardize, especially testing, but the internet itself really enables you to get very creative and forward thinking in terms of how you can change assessment and education in the future. Now, just jumping into what we mean by Education 3.0, using technology as a tool. One of the companies I was previously involved with was a tablet company. This was in 2012, 2013, when tablets were on the rise as the next frontier in terms of hardware that was going to level the playing field for students around the world. We were manufacturing our devices in India and bringing them down to Brazil for educational purposes. We actually had different software embedded on the device that allowed us to really create an all-in-one package that allowed students to not only interact from device to device, but also primarily focused on testing. Initially, it was math and science, and eventually we pivoted into English, which is what allowed us to kind of get some traction in Brazil in those days. Now, again, the whole idea was really focused on the one-stop solution. So really using the device as the tool. And through the device, we were able to administer all types of different exams, as well as deliver content directly to the students. And the idea being it's super low priced. We could white label it and customize it. And the general experience of using the device was something that most students in rural areas in Brazil had never seen before. This is a picture of our CEO with an indigenous school in the Amazon in Brazil, where we actually were able to distribute these tablets, create a kind of intranet inside of the school, and really allow them to leverage the use of technology to further their own education. The importance of leveraging connectivity and the importance of assessment. And this is actually where Edgesync was born. Now, when we talk about Education 4.0, this is an important thing that I'm sure many of you have heard, but I always like to reiterate, because I think there's a general fear amongst educators that technology is coming to take our jobs, where in reality, it's really meant as a tool to kind of help us. And in the context of testing and digitizing, your existing practices, this is something that I think is really important to underscore and understand as we move forward as educators. And when we go into universities and educational institutions and help them digitize their exams, this is something we always say to kind of propel the idea that we're here to help, and the technology is here to help as well. It's not meant to replace any existing people or even strategies and implementations, but the idea is really to kind of streamline how things are being conducted. So one way that we do this, and this is exactly how we do our own CEFR level testing, as well as how most of our partners use the platform to make their lives easier. So a learner takes a writing or speaking test on their computer or mobile device. It's distributed automatically through the system and algorithm we've created. And then the evaluator will actually get an email. They'll log into our backend system and then be able to actually conduct their evaluation. And this can be done not only for our tests, but most of the exams we've created for our partners also leverage this technology. And it's seemingly simple, but extremely effective. And the way that this works for schools, it allows this work from anywhere and work from home lifestyle we've now all had to adapt to really be okay. You can actually be sitting anywhere, pull out your cell phone, you get an email saying you have a test to evaluate. You can log in directly on your mobile device and score a test. So the entire focus of ours is really using the technology to facilitate these kinds of already standardized interactions with exams. Now, an interesting case study of this, I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to breeze through this. One of our big partners is in Indonesia. And when COVID hit, there was actually a pretty serious issue in the sense that everyone had to be tested digitally, but there were very few resources to be able to do it. And students were very widely spread out, and there were a lot of students. You know, LEA has some 63,000 plus students. And when we came in, we were originally focused on helping them do TOEFL, IELTS, and TOEIC prep, as well as mock testing. And last year, we launched a custom test. You know, LEA has their own EPT, the English placement test. And using that, we were actually able to allow them to continue conducting business relatively normally with a constant streamlined exam where they administer the test at scale, are able to then generate the results at scale, reports, certificates, and place students easily. And this was all done using the Edgesync system. Now, moving into AI and Education 5.0, as we like to call it, I always like to start by just kind of mentioning what is artificial intelligence. And I think a lot of people, when they think of AI, tend to think of the Terminator or things of this nature, which are more, I think, overly dramatized in terms of what AI actually is. When I think of artificial intelligence, I think of it more like this. The whole idea of artificial intelligence is to help us do our jobs better and even help us save time. And you know, the actual definition is really trying to simulate human intelligence in machines and program them to mimic our actions. So examples of this, which I'm sure many of you already know about, computer adaptive testing has become very relevant in the last few years, where as a student goes through an exam, the system is actually pulling from a giant pool of items, using different characteristics for each of the items. And as the student is going through, the system is self-updating, and it really adapts to the student. And, you know, we have a number of different ways that we create exams on our platform, and this is one of them. You can choose as an institution to make your exam adaptive. You can even choose the weightings of the different parameters for each of the items that you can select. And so we do really allow a high degree of customizability, which I think is important to mention and important to keep in mind moving forward. There is no silver bullet and there is no one size fits all. The whole idea is to create a system that is flexible and allows anyone to do their examinations online in whatever way is best for them. Other issues, especially things that we've started to deal with more recently, which was already mentioned as well by one of our other speakers today, is the idea of this artificial intelligence-led fraud detection. There are many ways to do this. A lot of companies that have been scrutinized in the news actually have someone watching the students take their test through a webcam, which I think is really strange to, to put it lightly. The idea is to really use artificial intelligence to teach the machine to recognize, you know, peculiar behavior. And when we developed our solution, our focus was really on using different tools from the webcam to tracking the student's eyes and such to actually be able to determine if they're doing something they should not be doing. And the entire development was really focused on the student experience. So instead of shutting off the exam or forcing students to get a 0 on their test, we have behavioral triggers that we've put into the system that really kind of force them to go down the path of academic honesty. That's how I like to phrase it, at least. And this is also constantly, you know, improving. And I think we're still very much the beginning of this in terms of how AI is going to change both generally our lives as educators, but also assessment online. We're at the very forefront of this entire industry still. Finally, using NLP and how natural language processing can actually impact and help us do assessments for language and how we're using it at Edgesync as well. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar, natural language processing is specifically focused on how human languages are processed and analyzed by computers. And the idea being that you can use computers to analyze large amounts of language data. So some of the common ways in which this is being deployed, especially for English testing or general language testing, and even things that we're doing internally. An interesting one of these is this machine learning based written assessment, where we actually use you know, IBM's Watson combined with a few of our own internal tools where users are constantly putting in or constantly writing essays to various prompts we have on the system. We're then able to train a computer on tens of thousands and now hundreds of thousands of these responses to actually be able to understand what would be deemed a good response or a bad response. Oftentimes, we don't rely fully on the machine to do this, and we have some human intervention as well during the process. But this is quickly becoming very efficient and effective at analyzing written proficiency, especially for English. Now, initially, the idea of analyzing context was the problem, and this is mostly where our human inputs come in. It's very effective at analyzing correct grammatical structures, even vocab usage, and other characteristics of what could be considered a good writing assessment. But the contextual analysis is where things are still lacking, and that's where I think a lot of the interest still is moving forwards. Beyond this, another thing that's quite interesting, which I'm sure many of you have experienced or at least have heard of, is this kind of automated spoken testing. And this becomes very difficult when you have users from all over the world. I can speak from personal experience, having English language learners from rural India to Amazonian villages in Brazil. Everyone learns the language differently based on their original mother tongue, and et cetera, et cetera. And so actually being able to develop an effective automatic machine-based spoken test is quite difficult. And the way that we've approached this is really having users take small phrases and repeat them into the computer. And we compare it against tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of samples from all over the world to really be able to see if they're pronouncing things correctly, if their intonation is correct, and more very specific pointed aspects of the language. And this is why this is called elicited imitation. And I think one of the exciting things we're currently working on is how to actually conduct real full-length automated speaking exams, where users will speak for 1 to 3 minutes into the computer and we'll be able to actually spit out a score. So this is a big challenge that I think we're all going to be facing, but the industry is moving at a very rapid pace, and this whole NLP space is very exciting.
Sorry to interrupt, Sean. So that the time is running out.
Don't worry, this is the end of my presentation. I was just going to say, using all these tools is what made Hannah at Berlitz happy that she was using Edgesync. And if you guys do have any questions and would like to contact me, here is my email. You can reach out to me at any time.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Sean, for joining us today during your time now during midnight. Right? So yeah, I totally agree that it's extremely important for teachers or educators to make use of technology, because technology can help teachers or educators. And with the power of technology and teachers' real-life experience and expertise, we can help our students in their learning and improve the way we assess and evaluate our students meaningfully. So AI and NLP can be one of the good solutions in the learning, language testing and training world. Yeah. All right. So ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of the first round, and now it's time for the Q&A session. So let's take the questions and allow our panelists to share their thoughts. I will have to pick a few questions that are most frequently asked by the participants, due to the time constraint. So for the first round, let's ask one question to each speaker, and if we have more time, so we can repeat the process. All right. So okay. So the first question, I think this on Professor Barry. So I'm going to read it out loud for you. I agree with your remarks on AI not having appropriate database until they have learned enough. Do you think ELT is in danger of going back to focus on discrete point teaching as a washback? This is from Professor Oda, Japan.
Masaki, I know him very well.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yes. I do think there is a danger that that could happen, and I think we've already seen it. There are well-known tests out there that have gone back to very discrete psycholinguistic representations of language. And let's face it, that's a sort of failed technology. We were there in the 1950s. We came out of it fully in the 1970s and 1980s, and now we're going back into it because it's what the machine allows us to do. Not all tests are like that, though, and there are people out there who are trying to do things differently and trying to do things better. But there are tests that rely, for example, on machine-generated items, machine-generated tasks that are very, very, very basic level. And when you look at it as a teacher, and most of us here started our lives as teachers, I certainly did, you look at it and you think, what the hell is that testing? Or what can that tell me about a person's ability to communicate in a real world context? We know from the experience, the old TOEFL test, for example, delivered in 1964, within a year, American universities were saying this multiple choice stuff doesn't work. This discrete item stuff doesn't work. That's why ETS developed the test of speaking and tests of writing, because they were telling people right from the beginning, don't just rely on this test. It's not enough. TOEFL, ETS have always been very open about that. And that system, it doesn't work. We're going back to it. I am concerned that we could go back to it just by default and be led down that dark road again. So I think it's a good point, Masaki Oda.
Right. Thank you, Professor Larry. We've got another question. I think this is to ask Professor Kim. All right. Okay, so the question is, how would you advise managing online assessment and giving feedback to large groups of students of more than 50 students?
Okay, thank you for the question. Actually, when we developed this KaiCE assessment, we pilot tested with a small group of students. So we didn't really try the system in the large classroom setting. But I think the situation is not very different because students are located in a different settings, place, and they perform individually and in groups simultaneously. So if students get immediate feedback, for example, for selective response tasks, they get immediate feedback or hints for the second attempt. In that case, they can learn by going through the assessment. And after the assessment, teacher also evaluates the students' speaking and writing performances in addition to student self and peer assessments. Then I think the teacher can give feedback individually so they can learn what they need to further study. So I think individual autonomous learning can be possible, like even though there are many students in the system.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Professor Kim. Next question. This question is for Sean. Yeah, the question is, do you think that AI systems monitoring for online exams would be a foolproof way to test real competency?
Good question. I think specifically around the technologies that exist for remote proctoring, so when, before COVID hit, this was an industry that was growing, but no one was really paying attention to. And as soon as COVID hit and the entire world went digital in 1 week, everyone was looking for a proctoring system and was in full panic mode. A year and a half later, when the dust has settled, I think the technologies that are now emerging are much more appropriate to be able to actually measure students' proficiencies across disciplines and also make sure they're not cheating. I think a lot of what we're seeing now is less, Orwellian, so to speak. Instead of people watching you through your computer, it's more really trying to make the experience as positive as possible for the students. Taking tests generally is not enjoyable. And so trying to actually make it a little bit better for the student who is taking it online in a high pressure situation is really what most companies, I think, now are trying to do. And in that context, I do think it's definitely possible that over the next couple of years, as things progress, we'll start to see some very native systems that are being created probably by people who are now currently at university and experiencing this problem firsthand, where they're able to test multiple disciplines effectively online and really kind of prevent academic dishonesty in the process.
All right, thank you, Sean. I think we still have time, so we can go another round. So let's take a look at the questions I've got. This is to ask Professor Berry how to ensure equity in current online assessments, particularly when not all students have equal access to assessments.
I think that's a really difficult question, isn't it? Because I know a lot of governments, a lot of ministries are trying to deal with that. And we've been working with a number of countries over the last year where there are massive differences between rural and urban, for example, or countries where there are many islands, for example. People are finding it more and more difficult just to get internet access.
Mm-hmm.
There are solutions, and we saw one of them there was Sean's solution, where you actually deliver the test through a tablet, a pre-existing tablet, or a tablet that you build specifically to deliver that test with. We've done that in countries. We actually ran a project in Bangladesh about 2 years ago, or 2 and a bit years ago, called English Impact, where we did a random sample of candidates around the country, and there was one village selected randomly in the system that took 2 days to get to. There was no direct way of getting to the village. We had to test 12 people in the village. Like, that was crazy, but that was the project. And we sent somebody up there, and they eventually had to walk like half a day at the end of the trip, because that's as far as public transport went, and carrying a bunch of tablets, and the students were able to take the test. So it is possible, and it's becoming more possible to do that kind of thing. It's not cheap, and that's an issue for some countries where they don't have those resources. But I think the ability now to do stuff and use your phone, you can deliver tests now. More and more people are looking at particularly tests of oral production and listening. It's relatively straightforward to deliver those by phone. Writing is a bit more difficult. Reading is tragic, because especially if you're asking people to read a lot, and that's one of the issues we have with my last question. People are thinking it's difficult to test writing and reading on a phone, so let's make the questions shorter. And then what you're doing then is you're reducing the construct to something that is more and more meaningless. So it is an issue, but for the productive skills, certainly for speaking and listening, we heard one very good presentation at the conference I was at yesterday about these people who had developed a local test of speaking on the phone, and it tremendously successful in a very poor part of the world. So it can be done, but it's a challenge.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much for your constructive response. Next question. This is for Professor Kim. Professor Kim mentioned the types of tests, among others, pre-test and post-test, and diagnostic tests after the final test. So the question is, does diagnostic tests have different purposes from those of the first two?
Okay, thank you for the question. Okay, it seems the person who asked the question misunderstood. I mentioned the different assessment purposes in the classroom, and I mentioned placement and achievement and diagnostic assessments used in the classroom by the teachers. And diagnostic assessments are different from the other two, placement and achievement. How different? Diagnostic assessment is administered before teaching. So, for example, before teaching a unit or before teaching a semester, the teachers want to know the strengths and weaknesses of students. So, by looking at the students' current status, the teachers can plan the curriculum and prepare the materials. So that's the purpose of diagnostic assessment. And as you know, the placement is for grouping students into the same levels for effective teaching and learning. And achievement test, the main difference between achievement and diagnostic assessment is achievement test is administered after teaching. So to see how much students have learned through the instruction. Okay.
Thank you very much, Professor Kim. More question. The question is, how important is the pilot testing of assessment in ELT context? This is the question to ask Mr. Sean. What are your thoughts about this?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
How important is the pilot testing of assessment in ELT context?
Interesting. So generally speaking, when we roll out our solution, especially in situations where the individuals leading the rollout may not be the most tech savvy, we always pilot. I always like to say it's good to walk before you run, in the sense that the last thing we want to do is roll out a solution to 50,000 students that doesn't make sense. So, it's in everyone's best interest to make sure that when adopting new technologies, that it's implemented in a measured and meaningful way. And especially in the ELT context, whenever we have a new partner coming on to either use their own exam or even our 4-skill-based test, we always start with a sample student or a group of students, in the sense that they're then able to see the solution in action, understand how it works in terms of activating licenses, generating results. There's a lot of pieces to the end-to-end solution outside of the user actually taking the exam, and a lot of that is involved with the institution actually implementing the tool. And then you have technical things like integrations and such, so that it makes it easier for people to pull data and et cetera, et cetera. So I'm hugely in favor of piloting everything. Although, the general tech mindset is move fast and break things. I think in our context, especially in ELT and education in general, it's very important that pilots are done and conducted appropriately.
All right, thank you, Sean, for your answers to the question. So, all right, I think we will now end the Q&A session. My apologies, due to the time limitation, and we will proceed with round 2 of the webinar. So in this round, I will ask our speakers to give us concluding remarks or final words for a few minutes. So let's begin with Professor Barry. Would you like to provide and share your thoughts with us all?
Yes. What are my concluding thoughts? My concluding thoughts are that I think AI offers us an interesting and challenging future. I think they're here to stay, the different technologies. And just before this conference today, I was on an email conversation with one of my colleagues listing some of the areas that we're just looking at ourselves. And we're looking at almost 10 different aspects, from auto text generation to auto item generation to all kinds of different aspects of how AI can help. I think we should embrace the use of AI, but we should also question the use of AI. With everything we do, from the theories we develop for language test development and validation to the AI systems we use, we should question everything. I guess I was brought up, my father was a man who always believed that everything out there was there to be questioned. And if it didn't stand up to questioning, it shouldn't be there. And I think I've developed that same idea myself over the years. And I believe that we should question, we should ask for evidence. Demonstrate, please, for me, how your system is not biased. How did you ensure that your system is not biased? How did you ensure that there are not inherent biases built into your system? What did you do to try to prevent it? We need to ask the questions. They're awkward questions, but we also need to learn to talk to the AI providers, the developers we work with. It's not their fault that they're not giving us the information that we want. They don't know what information we want. We have to tell them, this is the information we want. This is what we would like to do. So it's a matter of learning how to communicate all over again to these different people so that we actually build a future together. Because I have a sort of a dystopian view of the future where if we don't take hold of this and build it in the direction we want to build it in, it could take over in a bad way. And we could end up with systems that are fully automated, very cheap to run, that countries will say, I buy that, I use that, it's cheaper than people. And you'll have two education systems. You have one education system, which is an automated teaching and learning system and assessment system that's cheap and for people who can't afford anything else. And then you have another system, which is driven by humans with support by AI, but appropriate support that is much more expensive. So you divide the world even more. That's my sort of Blade Runner dystopian view of the future that I hope we never reach.
All right, thank you, Professor, for your insightful information sharing with us today. Next, Professor Kim, any thoughts you wish to share with the audience today?
Okay, my final thought is very similar to Barry's and Sean's comments made in their presentations. I think the COVID-19 pandemic has profoundly changed education, and different types of online learning are being widely used around the world. And there is also a great need for online assessment. But this does not mean that the assessment process or basic principles of language testing have changed along with the changes in the educational environment. So what has changed is the integration of technology with language assessment. But it is not technology that is leading language assessment. Rather, we must find ways to integrate technology into assessment principles. And for this, I think what's important for us as language educators is to provide our expertise and insights in developing online language assessments. And collaboration with technology experts is necessary and very important for developing and managing online assessment systems. But we must let them know which assessment features teachers and students need to better use language assessment so that they can go beyond what they are doing today. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Professor Kim, for your fruitful ideas today. Okay, last but not least, any thoughts or final conclusion you would like to leave with us today, Sean?
Well, I think Professor Kim and Professor O'Sullivan stole the spotlight, but just to piggyback on what they said, I fully agree. I think that, it's important that as educators, we ignore a lot of the pandemonium we're seeing in headlines saying that technology is coming after our jobs and we're losing the fight. There is no fight. The whole idea is that it's, one shared world and one shared system. The technology is supposed to enhance what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. And, you know, along those lines, I also actively encourage everyone who's watching now, when you do come across a new technological solution, as was suggested by Professor Kim and Professor O'Sullivan, definitely question it, but embrace it as well. The idea is to look at these kinds of tools with a more open mindset and more open arms, and really try to usher us into the next generation. Because I do truly believe, you know, as that slide I had in my deck said, that technology won't replace teachers, but teachers that use technology will replace those that don't.
I really like that quote. All right,
It's a
thank
good
you
one.
very much, Sean. Thank you very much. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have had such a great time together today. So on behalf of AsiaTEFL organization, I would like to express my gratitude to our three speakers of this webinar today for their time, great presentations, and fruitful discussions regarding the theme today, transcending the frontier of English language education, assessment, and evaluation in the new normal. So thank you to all participants, wherever you are. I believe what we have gained and exchanged today is a great way to keep our professional development continuing in our supporting community in Asia and globally. So thank you once again, and all the best. Stay safe, everyone. I would now hand over the session to our MC, Fiona. Over to you, Fiona.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kittipat Chutichaiwirath, for doing such a great job as moderator. And a great thanks to our speakers too for your wonderful presentations and contribution and your time. Of course, we'd like to say thank you to participants as well, because you know, you've actively engaged with this webinar, and there's been plenty of questions and comments in the chat room. It's been quite active. Yeah, just a gentle reminder, it's not finished yet though. We'll let you know soon about how to get an e-certificate, but there's a couple of things to mention before that. I'd like to take this opportunity actually to introduce our AsiaTEFL Professional Network Committee members who work behind the webinar series of 2021. So we'll just see who they are. The slides will play. Prof. Pragasit Sititikul, Advisor. Chai Shunyu, Director. Dr. Savika Varapon, Secretary. Myself, Fiona Saragopan, Secretary. Mr. Kittipat Chutichaiwirath, Technical Management and Publicity and Promotions. Nurhizrin Anwar, Technical Management. Kittichai Nilubol, Technical Management. Professor Hikyung Lee, Publicity and Promotions. Dr. H.C. Aslam Khan, Publicity and Promotion. Tanbir Kaur Sekhon, Publicity and Promotion. Dr. Zaira Abu Hassan Sha'ari, Data Management. Grace Chang Suyeng, Data Management. Lukman Mai, Data Management. Datin Dr. Rajamazvin Aziz, Finance. Dr. Ali Ahmed Saman, Finance. And that's it for our crew, yeah? We are 15 committee members from Malaysia, South Korea, Thailand, and we've worked as hard as possible to ensure that the webinar series 2021 is conducted successfully. But let me continue by introducing a webinar 5. So what happens next October is that we've decided to run our next or 5th webinar on Saturday, the 16th of October, 2021, under the theme ELT Research in the New Normal, Opportunities and Alternatives. Please do welcome to participate, we welcome you. Please do join us with these details, and such will be on our official website at AsiaTEFL.org or the Facebook page for AsiaTEFL Association. Please do check, and from time to time we'll update these details. So please do register for the next one if you have found this one to be a good challenge and a good area of opportunity for learning and sharing. Please also take note, we'd like to take a group photo. So if you don't mind turning on your cameras, we're almost at the end of the session. The technical team will take a couple of minutes to take your photos, so please smile. Okay, technical team.
All right, on 3, 2, 1. One more, please. On 3, 2, 1. Right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, now over to e-certification. As I've informed you earlier, we're actually quite happy to issue e-certificates to all of you who've been attending the webinar. So if you don't mind checking out the screen, you'll see a link and QR code displayed. Now, don't quickly click in yet. Let me give you a few indications of what needs to be done. All right, you've got a link and a QR code here. We want you to use your device to either enter the link or scan the QR code, and this will give you an e-form. This is where you can put your details in. But take note, this e-form is going to disappear in the next 15 minutes. So we're opening it up for the next 15 minutes. I'm going to request that you pay very close attention to how you enter your data in. Please make sure your email address is correct. Make sure the spaces, the dots, the symbols, the lack of symbols, etc. are accurate, because we need to send your information to the correct email address. Please make sure your name is entered in accurately as well, no spelling errors, because we will generate whatever you have given to us via this form. Okay, so please double check before handing in your submission. Please take note, we're going to send you these e-certificates approximately in the next 2 weeks. And once we've actually sent out these certificates, we will send another email to everybody who registered for the webinar, just to ensure that you know e-certificates have been sent out. And if there are any issues, or if it is a case that you have not received your certificate, we'll give you an RSVP deadline, right? So we give you a few days to feedback to us as to, you know, if you do need an e-certificate and we have left you out of the list or something has happened. All right. Please be a little patient with us. We will get back to you if there are any issues. But we'd like to request that you fill up that certificate now, please. We'll still be online, right? For those who've completed your form, well done. You'll probably receive your e-certificate soon. Now, if there are no other questions, then we'll leave the e-certificate system open for the next 15 minutes. But I'd like to say thank you, everybody. This is now the end of the session. On behalf of AsiaTEFL Professional Network Committee, we'd again like to thank you all for your participation. And we hope to see you in the 5th webinar in October. Thank you. Stay safe. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us today.
All right, thank
Yeah,
you.
bye-bye. All the best, Sean.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Take care, Aslam. See ya.
Have a good time.
Bye, Sean.
Bye.
Take care, guys.
Yeah, Prof. Lee, bye-bye.
Bye, Professor Barry, Professor Kim, and everyone.
Yes, bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.